Looking to take your financial knowledge to the next level? You're in the right place. Welcome to Ask Ralph, offering accounting, technical, and financial advice. Whether you're looking to save taxes or improve your business, he's got you covered. Here's your host of Ask Ralph, Ralph Eastup Jr.
Welcome back to the Ask Ralph Show. Thought I'd take a few minutes in today's show and talk about identity theft. And this is something that I've mentioned before, but the IRS has recently come out with a very large report that's been assembled by a very large group with the IRS on stopping identity theft. And they've given us 12 tips for protecting yourself, and I thought I'd go through these 12 because I really find this to be very important. And with it being tax time, I think it's more relevant than normal. Number one, understand the importance of your Social Security number. And this is something I remember being taught from a young age. I remember when I was a kid, my dad made a copy of my Social Security card, and I remember seeing on there, not to be used for identity purposes. And then it seems like my entire life it's been that way, from when you're enrolling in college and all kinds of things like that. So you need to make sure you're taking a look at Social Security and where it's being used. Treat it as if it's precious and rare. Even if your identity is stolen and you're given a new number, it's still going to be linked to your old number. So it's real important not to give that out just because it's been requested, but make sure it's needed. So number two, don't be lax about your passwords or privacy settings. Now, this is something we've talked about before on the show. It's easy to keep passwords simple and, easy to remember them, but that's the problem with those things. You need to look at multiple authentication methods to make sure your information, can't be hacked or be used against you. One of the things that I've recommended before was using a password service such as LastPass or First Password, I think is the name of. There's a lot of them out there, but they are very good things to use instead of using the old written notebook that has your passwords in there. Number three, if you don't know them and they contacted you, don't trust them. It's kind of the old adage of when you were a kid and your mom says, don't talk to strangers. Well, kind of the same thing goes along here with identity theft. Whether you've been contacted over the phone via email or via snail mail, if they've contacted you and asking you for personal information, that's a red flag not to trust them. I've taught my kids from an early age, if somebody calls on the phone and, they're asking for information, well, if they're calling, they should have that information. Take the initiative if someone calls you and says they're from a purported organization, and make sure that's where they're from. Number four, before providing your Social Security number or ITIN to a business, be sure they need it. And we come across this sometimes in our industry now, and unfortunately with the tax preparation or accounting, we require that. It's something the IRS requires, but not everybody does. So, many businesses will ask you for this information, even though they don't need it. So just because they ask you doesn't mean you need to provide it. It's perfectly fair to ask them why they need it and, ask them to reconsider whether they need to take that stuff or not. So number five is use technology to keep your personal computer safe. Now, I find this to be kind of funny because in my work with clients, a lot of times I'll get involved with helping them with their personal computers if they're working with QuickBooks or something like this. And I find so many people aren't taking the time to install, anti-spam and antivirus software as well as anti-malware. And if they do have firewalls, a lot of times they've broken those down or they've not updated their software lately. That's something you really need to keep an eye on, and it's money well spent. Number six, use common sense when using social media. One of the things that it notes in this study was, it's almost like putting a welcome sign in neon that says "Welcome Thieves" sign on the front door. And it's amazing to me how many people will post things on social media that just gives away too much of their information, and they don't pay attention to, who has access to that information. So I definitely agree with the IRS on this. Keep in touch with your friends and is fine, but, be cautious as to what you put on social media. I know I've heard of people's houses being robbed because on social media they would put, we're going on vacation. We're going to make sure we leave our lights on. But a lot of times that's not enough. Number seven, take the time to read your credit card statements and check your credit report. You'd be surprised how many people don't have a clue what's on their credit report. Now, a lot of people will find out when they go to apply for a loan or something like that, but a lot of times it's too late. Same way with your credit card statement. I don't know how many people I've met that never even look at their statement. They look at the balance and say, well, that makes sense because I bought, this, and this, but you need to review each transaction to make sure it's familiar. And if it isn't, call your credit card company immediately. Many identity thieves will charge an insignificant sum to see if you're paying attention, then go ahead and charge up a fortune's worth of goods and services later. One of the key things they did before was they would go to a gas station and try to authorize gas purchase because they would try to authorize $1. At the same time, and order your credit report or subscribe to one of these credit monitoring service. Number 8, use caution with your mail and your mailbox. That little red flag that lets your postal carrier know you have mail for them is also a sign to identity thieves that there are more worthwhile information just sitting there for the taking. I'm not a big fan of using your mailbox to process outgoing mail. It's too easy for someone to come along and just grab that stuff. And that could be a way for incoming mail as well. You got to make sure you're paying attention to those things. And once you get that mail, make sure you shred any personal information. And another thing that they mention here is consider a mailbox with a lock so that thieves can't get into it. I really think that's a great plan. Number 9, old tax returns and tax documents need special treatment before discarding. And I get this question asked a lot, Ralph, how long do I need to keep my stuff? Well, I generally tell people to keep it for about 7 years, but, once you decide that it's too old, you don't need it anymore, I certainly would not encourage you to just take it and throw it in a trash can. These are one of the things that you, at a minimum, got to shred, and consider cross shredding or, confetti shredding. A lot of local banks and credit unions will have shredding events. So keep your eyes open for those type of things and take advantage of those services when they're available. Number 10, be mindful of your private information when out in public. What we're talking about here is, when you're sitting in a coffee shop or browsing the internet, taking cash out of an ATM or paying for a purchase with a credit card, be mindful about who's around you and what's going on around you. One of the things in Middletown we've heard a lot about lately was people putting these scam devices on the front of gas pumps where they can grab your information. A lot of times, people will pick up free Wi-Fi or public Wi-Fi. That's really dangerous. If you're going to use that for browsing the internet, that's fine. But if you're punching any kind of personal information into your social security number, be cautious not to do that on a public Wi-Fi. Number 11, and we talked about this last week, is the earlier you file your taxes, the better protected you are. And that's because, once you filed your return, no one else is going to be able to file a return under that social security number. So it really does make sense to file your return early and get it started. And number 12, make sure that people are as informed as you are. And this is talking about, as a result of electronic address books, shared social networks and like, we are more connected to the people in our world than ever before, and that makes us more vulnerable. Every person that's connected to you could be the link that exposes you to identity theft. I don't know how many times I've received emails from people that are obviously scam emails. And, I think that most people just delete them. Well, I don't. I go back to the person and say, hey, you should know that your email account is sending out emails to people and you may not even realize it. But a lot of times, it hits your spam filter, and you got to go through and check those things out. And if you've been a victim of us identity theft, one of the things you can do is you can contact the IRS. They have a special number set up. It's 1-800-908-4490. I hope this has been helpful to protect you against identity theft.
You've been listening to Ask Ralph, brought to you by Saggio Accounting Plus. Please subscribe to and rate our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a rating and review. Our podcast is produced by Carolyn Peters. Thank you for listening, and be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Ask Ralph Media. You can also hear me each week on 1450 WILM and on 1410 WDOV in Delaware and on the iHeartRadio app. Submit your questions or ideas for future shows by sending an email to AskRalph@AskRalph.com.
The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.